My name is Jamie Cashman, and I'm the Government Relations Manager here at ISAC, along with Lucas Bankin, Public Policy Specialist. And we appreciate you joining us today as we put a bow on all the legislative activity for 2017. As a part of this webinar, you'll also have the ability to ask questions. And so I believe there's a little box in the corner of the webinar where you can type in questions. And once we wrap up our presentation, we will then address any questions that you might have. Certainly, this was a unique session. Every session, they say, is almost like a snowflake, and this was definitely unique. With the Republicans taking control of both the Iowa Senate and House, along with controlling the governor's office, there was a number of pieces of legislation that haven't moved forward in previous years that did move forward as a result of full Republican control. So what we're going to do is first touch off on some of ISAC's priorities, and then our objectives, and then talk about other significant pieces of legislation affecting counties that move forward or did not move forward during this legislative session. And our first one is on mental health and disability services, specifically funding. As many of you know, this has been a long time a priority ever since, well, for a variety of years, but especially after they went to the regional-based system 3 or 4 years ago. And so we've been trying to find a long-term and sustainable funding solution to this, and finally we were able to accomplish this in Senate File 504. What this basically does, it eliminates the 1996 county caps and establishes new regional caps, which allows for levy equity for counties within the regions where there's been a disparity before. So that was a significant plus. The next was it requires counties to spend down their carry forward balances to 25% in regions with a population before or below, 100,000, and for regions that are above, actually, I'm sorry, there is a typo there. For regions that are in a population above, for regions that are below 100,000, they have to go to a 25% carry forward balance, and for regions with a population 100,000 and above, they have to go to 20%. And then it actually spends down those balances over a course of 3 years. And then finally, there's an interim study after the 28th session to look at the financial viabilities of the regions. So this was something that was a plus because we don't believe, certainly this isn't a long-term fix for the mental health and disability services system, but it does provide some relief. And we certainly know that there's some regions, specifically over in eastern Iowa, that are going to be in some dire financial straits here in the next couple of years. Next is on water quality and natural resources and outdoor recreational trust funding. There's 2 bills, both the House and the Senate, both passed bills that looked at a variety of different things to improve water quality, certainly to provide on-farm incentives to improve water quality through the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy, and then also providing revolving loans for wastewater treatment facilities. Unfortunately, both bills kind of crossed like ships in the night and did not pass and go down to the governor. But it certainly looks like they'll be considered and likely to be debated next session, as we'll be in the second year of a 2-year General Assembly. Also, too, I want to address that there was an amendment to fund the Trust, the Outdoor Recreation Trust, on the Senate File 512. Unfortunately, that was voted down on the floor. Next, on food safety, as many of you know, we've been trying to get these food fees raised for several years, as we've seen a number of the county local food inspection programs go back to the Department of Inspection and Appeals as a result of the low fees aren't able to meet the county's needs to handle these programs and cover the cost of doing business. There was a Senate File 303 that was assigned to the Senate Ways and Means subcommittee. Unfortunately, it didn't move forward, but as I said before, it's still eligible for the 2018 session because it's a Ways and Means bill. And then finally, on our top priorities, we're on distracted driving. What we were calling for was a full ban on the use of a handheld electronic device while driving. There were two bills that passed one out of each chamber, one out of the House and one out of the Senate. But unfortunately, they did not get full debates on the floor in each chamber. But we were very happy that Senate File 234, which makes texting while driving a primary offense, and it also tightens up the definition of texting, that did pass, and it was signed by the governor. So I'll turn it over to Lucas to talk about our objectives.
Good afternoon. As you know, we also have objectives that we work on each year to have drafted and work through the process. And so I'd like to go over a few of those that were signed by the governor this year. First, House File 203, dealing with the federal aid road fund swap, allows the allocation of primary road funds from the state to local jurisdictions in lieu of the federal aid dollars that come in. This provides a lot of efficiencies for both local governments and for state government. First, for the counties, we feel that the state is just better equipped to deal with some of the requirements and regulations that come with those federal dollars. And so that'll provide some efficiencies on our part. And for the state, they are required to do the oversight and monitoring of any local projects. So this will free up some of their resources that were normally used for oversight of local projects. House File 241, dealing with County Veterans Affairs, clarifies that the boss of the Veteran Service Officer is the County Commission on Veterans Affairs. This just clarifies that so that they know where their direction comes from, and the priorities of the office comes from the County Commission. And I will note that that doesn't prohibit the Veteran Service Officer from working in other departments, taking on additional responsibilities within a different department, or being shared by multiple counties. It's just that when they are performing services for veterans, their guidance comes from the County Commission on Veterans Affairs. Senate File 439, dealing with federal tax liens, allows the original notices of those tax liens to be either returned to the sender or to be disposed of, as long as they're recorded in the index book or recorded digitally in the recorder's office. So recorders will no longer be required to keep the original copies. And Senate File 501, dealing with sheriff civil fees, increases the fee structure set for the county sheriffs for certain civil process servicing and other services where fees are collected. And this is a direct result from a study done in 2016 by the Iowa State Sheriffs and Deputies Association. So we're very glad that those recommendations were taken, and the fees will be increased to cover the cost of providing those services. And I will also note that, as Jamie said, we are just finishing year one of a two-year cycle. So we do have quite a number of our objectives that have been drafted, got moving through the process this year. Unfortunately, did not make it to the governor's desk, but we'll be able to pick up next year with those bills that we already have drafts. They've already started through the subcommittee and committee process. Some have even passed one chamber. So we'll pick up right where we left off when we resume next year. And just to discuss some bills that will have an effect on counties, not necessarily our objectives. Some we were supportive of, some we opposed, but nonetheless, they will all have an impact on county government in one way or the other. House File 291 was maybe the most newsworthy and high-profile bill of the year, dealing with public employment collective bargaining. The bill made significant changes to Iowa Code Chapter 20 as it relates to negotiations, the arbitration process, and the certification of a collective bargaining unit. So first, for all bargaining units, they are prohibited from negotiating on retirement systems, dues checkoffs, and other payroll deductions for political contributions. Then we kind of take two different paths, and for those collective bargaining units whose membership is less than 30% public safety employees, they will be limited to only negotiating on base wages and other permitted and mutually agreed upon items. The non-public safety units are strictly prohibited from negotiating insurance, leaves of absence for political activity, supplemental pay, transfer procedures, evaluation procedures, procedures for staff reductions, and subcontracting for public services. Those would still be permissive items for the public safety collective bargaining units. And no collective bargaining agreement can exceed 5 years. Moving on to the arbitration process, both parties are prohibited from introducing evidence on things outside of the scope of their negotiations during the arbitration process. So as an example, the non-public safety employee bargaining units are not allowed to negotiate on insurance, so that couldn't be used as a piece of evidence in the arbitration process. And for those non-public safety bargaining units, the arbitrator cannot consider old agreements, nor can they consider the employer's ability to raise taxes, collect fees, or generate any sort of revenue in order to pay for the conditions of the agreement. And finally, for those non-public safety bargaining units, the arbitrator cannot award an increase in wages that is greater than, that exceeds the lesser of 3% or the 12-month increase in the Consumer Price Index. And for certification of a collective bargaining unit, there's a 2-year waiting period after a decertification, after a failed vote on certification, or after representation was not retained. And it also removes the provisions for a runoff election if a employee organization does not reach 50% in the vote. Then there will no longer be a runoff election. It will be that those employees will not be represented by an employee organization. And one of the questions that we continue to get is, how does this affect current bargaining units? And the answer to that is, if there are agreements in place that were ratified or in place before the effective date, which was upon enactment, February 17th of 2017, they will remain in effect. But if there were negotiations going on at that time and there was no agreement in place, those would be subject to the new provisions of the law. House File 295 was perhaps the biggest issue that we were facing when it comes to local control. They were extremely blatant, and it was known simply as the preemption bill. So two major components. First, local governments were prohibited from adopting an ordinance or resolution dealing with employment matters. So obviously this meant the minimum wage that was increased in 5 counties, but it also covered hiring practices, employment leave, employment benefits, anything where the state or federal government would have control over employment practices, the local governments would be prohibited from acting on. And it also prohibited local governments from adopting an ordinance dealing with standards or requirements dealing with the sale or marketing of consumer merchandise. And the bill also said that any ordinance, motion, or resolution that was in place either prior to or after the enactment would be void and unenforceable. And that, of course, applies to the 5 counties who have increased the minimum wage. House File 478 deals with the Property Assessment Appeals Board and different provisions dealing with assessors. First, the future repeal of the Property Assessment Appeal Board was stricken. We are supportive of that provision of this bill. We think PAB is a good tool and prevents assessors and boards of review from being caught up in district court. It provides a step where hopefully some of these issues can get sorted out short of court date. The bill also made several changes to the education of assessors. First, it prescribed that the Department of Revenue would come up with recommendations for preliminary education for individuals looking to take the assessor or deputy assessor exam. And it also put in place a study for the interim to look at the continuing education requirements of assessors and deputy assessors. There are also several other changes. First, updating the definition of misconduct to include engaging in assessment practices in conflict with law. And if someone were to be found to have committed misconduct, they would be responsible for the court costs and the process of appealing any overassessment or inequity in the assessment process if an assessment was appealed. And finally, it prohibited the collection of certain business data from commercial and industrial property owners. Those owners felt that the collection of certain data could put them at a disadvantage with their competitors if that information became public. House File 517, dealing with weapons regulations, was described as the most significant gun legislation in Iowa history. And so I will touch briefly on some of the issues affecting counties, but I would direct you to the bill summary book that goes through the entire bill and all of the provisions. Christy Harshbarger did an excellent job of going piece by piece through that bill, so I won't repeat that here today, but just a few things that affect counties directly. First, making changes to the permit process, the training requirements, and the renewal process for permits to carry and permits to purchase. And if an applicant appeals the sheriff's denial of an application for a permit and that person is found to be qualified, the county is liable for the court costs and attorney fees of the applicant. The bill removes requirements that a person secure a firearm while using a snowmobile or ATV. If an owner, a tenant, or a person with permission from an owner or a tenant is target shooting in the unincorporated area, they cannot be found in violation of a noise ordinance. So things could get kind of noisy out there, but they will not be found in violation of any noise ordinance that your county might have. And finally, the piece that we've been getting the most questions about is dealing with weapons in the courthouse and on county property. Prior law prohibited political subdivisions from enacting an ordinance, and I'm going to quote, regulating the ownership, possession, legal transfer, lawful transportation, registration, or licensing of firearms when it's otherwise lawful. We do have an Attorney General's opinion, and based on that, we don't believe that this language prohibited the county from banning weapons either in the courthouse, in county buildings, or on county property. The change to the law in this bill added that a person adversely affected would have standing and could file suit for relief for damages. However, the term adversely affected was not defined and would likely have to be determined in court. Senate File 489, dealing with fireworks. We've also been receiving plenty of calls and emails on this. This allows for the possession, sale, transfer, purchase, and use of consumer fireworks during certain times. That period has actually already begun It's from June 1st to July 8th and December 10th to January 3rd, and it is limited to the hours of 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. However, a county can opt out and either prohibit the use altogether, or they can adjust the time frames or adjust the dates that they are allowed in several counties, and probably more cities have already begun to do that. Fireworks can be sold from permanent structures during those same dates, and in conforming temporary structures between June 13th and July 8th. The bill says that local governments cannot prohibit the sale of consumer fireworks, but we believe that local zoning ordinances can regulate the location of sales as they would for any other commercial or industrial uses or temporary sales structures. And I will note that the current restrictions on display fireworks will stay in place, but a county can still issue a permit for the use of display fireworks.
All right, and I'll touch on some additional bills affecting counties. There's a lot of activity around election bills this year, with the largest bill coming in, or largest number of changes coming in House File 516, which makes a variety of different changes to the conduct and administration of elections, pertaining specifically to voter registration, signature verification for absentees, and when absentee ballots go out to voters. It bans straight ticket voting, but the biggest change that it requires a photo ID to vote at the polls. And if a voter does not have a valid ID, and what a valid ID would be a driver's license, a non-operator ID, a U.S. passport, a U.S. military ID, or a U.S. veteran's ID, then a voter ID card will be provided then from the Secretary of State's office. House File 471, it basically allows for the combining of precincts to one site in all elections now. Basically, in previous elections, it did call for that you could have multiple precincts at one site, but then you had to have different set of boundaries between the voters at that one site and a different set of poll workers. This allows for all those precincts to come together and not have the boundaries before, and that also have one set of poll workers. And House File 566 now combines in November city and school elections.
Okay, for probably the third or fourth year in a row now, we have seen all of the tax credits fully funded. Of particular note this year is this is the third year now of the replacement claims for commercial industrial property and the new business property tax credit, both fully funded. As you probably know, looking at our action alerts and our weekly updates, there was some talk this year on the commercial industrial replacement claims, but we were happy to see in the standings bill that those were fully funded. I will put an asterisk on the fully funded part. As you might recall from Senate File 295, those replacement claims are now limited and capped at the fiscal year 2017 level. So the $152 million appropriation will now be frozen. So it probably won't cover that entire 10% difference with the 90% rollback, but it will be the full 152 to cover fiscal year 17 and then frozen going forward. I believe that this will be an issue for the foreseeable future, something that will be talked about again next legislative session. So I will take this opportunity to thank you for your support and reaching out to your legislators to share with them the importance of the replacement claims to make up for the lost revenue due to the legislatively imposed rollback on commercial industrial property. Another big part of our job at the Capitol is to work on your behalf in opposing bills that are not advantageous or may be detrimental to counties in Iowa. So I want to go over just briefly some of the bills that we successfully defeated this year. First, there were quite a number of bottle bill repeal bills. We, of course, opposed the repeal of the bottle bill and, in fact, support the expansion to 10-cent redemption. And we would also like to include other beverage containers not currently covered under the original bottle bill. And this is supported, of course, by our county supervisors, county conservation trying to keep their parks clean, and the county engineers trying to keep the roadside ditches clean. We think it's been a successful program that is in need of expansion rather than repeal. Quite a few bills dealing with county compensation boards. Basically, the compensation board would be eliminated and their duties would fall to the county board of supervisors. We are supportive of the county compensation board as it provides a resource for the board of supervisors, and it also provides a system of checks and balances to make sure that there is equity and fairness in the compensation determination. A couple bills on wind energy property taxes that would prohibit the use of tax increment financing on wind turbines, which would take away a tool from the local boards of supervisors that use TIF for economic development. Raw milk comes up every year. We are still opposed because of the public health risk that presents. Subdivision assessments was a new bill this year. Currently, when property is subdivided for development, it remains assessed as undeveloped land until either construction begins or 5 years from the subdivision, whichever occurs first. And this bill would have gotten rid of that 5-year period and had the land assessed as undeveloped indefinitely until it was sold for construction. This goes opposite of the incentive to develop land once it's subdivided, and would not be assessing that property as its intended use. Senate File 481 dealing with immigration laws was a very large immigration bill, but I want to touch on the part that most affected counties, dealing with the Sheriff's Department receiving immigration detainers and being forced to comply with those. We believe this is a decision that each sheriff can make for himself or herself based on their local conditions, their determination on the validity of the detainer, and not something that is to be forced from the state government. And when I say forced, the bill would say that if a person were released, the county would be liable for any damages caused by that person for the next 10 years. And the political subdivisions, in this case the county, that would be in violation of the provisions of the bill would also be prohibited from receiving state funds. So we stand with the Sheriffs and Deputies Association in opposing this because of the issues that it brings up and our opinion that those decisions could be made at the local level. Senate File 483 dealing with primary runoffs would, in the case of a primary where a candidate did not receive 35% of the vote, rather than going to a party convention to determine their nominee, it would require a runoff election. Of course, this is a burden on local taxpayers and the auditor's office for what is a function of a political party. House Study Bill 91 dealing with essential county purpose moves certain activities from the list of essential county purposes to the list of general county purposes, and of course that would necessitate approval at a special election for the use of general obligation bonds. House Joint Resolution 7 called for a constitutional amendment to the Constitution of Iowa to allow the General Assembly to reorganize counties and then to locate or change county seats. And this kind of goes without saying that we don't think the legislature should be in the business of reorganizing or consolidating counties or changing county seats. House File 284, dealing with ATV registration, would allow for registration through the DOT in addition to the DNR, and then allow the use of ATVs on secondary roads. We believe this is a decision that should be made at the local level with the Board of Supervisors in consultation with the county engineer, county sheriff, and the county attorney. House File 359 deals with the gift of land and would require the Board of Supervisors to approve any gift of land to another county division, agency, or department. We don't think that's completely necessary, especially in the cases where that department might have their own governing board. So just as an example, if someone wanted to donate pasture land to the conservation department, we feel it would be most appropriate for the county conservation board to approve that gift. And House File 386 deals with involuntary mental health commitments and requires the sheriff to take the patient into protective custody in the absence of a court order for commitment, an undue burden on the county sheriff in a case where that person should be receiving mental health treatment. And House File 486, dealing with county supervisor districts, only applied to the top 5 counties in population, those counties with a population over 130,000, but it required them to adopt and maintain Supervisor District Plan 3, which is a live in your district and vote in your district plan. This is something that currently is decided by the voters of a county, and we believe that's who should have the say, not the state legislature, on how people are represented by their Board of Supervisors. And just as a side note, the top 5 counties, 2, Polk and Lynn, already have Supervisor District Plan 3, but Scott, Johnson, and Blackhawk would be forced to draw districts and have a special election to determine their new representation. Again, this is something that should be and is currently decided at the local level by the voters in that county. House File 651, dealing with property tax assessments and the county assessor, would place the burden of proof on the assessor rather than the property owner when an assessment is appealed. The assessor would be responsible for a percentage of the cost incurred for that appeal, equal to the percentage that the assessment was too high if it was found to be incorrect. It adds 4 elected members to the conference board, each representing a classification of property: residential, agricultural, commercial, and industrial. And each of those members would be their own voting unit. So currently on the conference board, with the supervisors being 1 unit, the schools being 1 unit, and the mayors being 1 unit, it would take those voting units up to 7, and these 4 elected members of the conference board would each be their own unit. And finally, it expands the grounds on which a property owner can appeal an assessment in even-numbered years. And finally, House File 656 excludes the school district foundation property tax from the division of revenue used under TIF. And I will add again that being just finishing year 1 of a 2-year General Assembly, these bills will be eligible if they're reassigned next year. So these are things that we will continue to keep an eye on and continue to oppose, and we certainly appreciate your help in letting your legislators know that these are bad bills for counties.
All right, at this point, we'll take any questions. We'll just wait a few seconds. All right, while we're waiting for questions, we'll go, the work has already begun for the 2018 legislative session. We're right in the process now of, here in June, of collecting proposals. While we accept proposals from individual members, we strongly suggest as affiliates meet that they work through the affiliate process and moving those forward through the LPC. But certainly we accept all proposals from members. For our proposal deadline is on July 28th of this year. And then on August 11th, we will send out a packet of the proposals for all of the membership to review. And then something that will happen new this year, instead of a two-day LPC retreat that we've had in years past to consider proposals, it'll be held on one day in conjunction with our annual meeting, our annual conference here in Des Moines. Also at this time, I will allow also for individual members to attend the LPC and provide public comment on the proposals. Then on September 14th, there will be another meeting of the LPC and the LPC will make recommendations for ISAC's legislative priorities, and that will go out to the membership. And then in October, there will be an ISAC legislative webinar to outline the recommendations of the LPC, and also to provide a tutorial on our new online voting system that we will be doing. And then also in October, then the ISAC voting members will have an opportunity to vote on the policy statements out of the package, and to vote on the legislative objectives individually, and to identify the top choices for the top priorities. Then on November 16th and 17th, the ISAC Board of Directors will meet to accept the membership vote and to set the final legislative priorities for the 2018 session.
We did have a couple questions come in.
All right.
First up, what do you see for additional expansion of powers on fireworks use in counties? Do you see another preemption bill coming for that?
This is something that the zoning officials have talked about and continue to talk about, and it is our position, and from media accounts, I think the state fire marshal agrees that local zoning can still take effect. That's not to say that legislators might disagree with that and explicitly exempt or preempt zoning from affecting fireworks in the future. I think time will tell. We'll kind of let cities and counties work through this. It's all relatively new, and so I think there will be a little bit of trial and error and figuring out exactly how this system is going to work. As I said, it is just so new. So this could look totally different next January. So I think time will tell, but we would be opposed to any preemption or circumvention of local zoning ordinances.
Do you have anything more specifically to touch on about the use of fireworks in cities and counties?
Yes, the use, you can completely opt out of the use. So if a city or county says fireworks are not allowed, then they are not allowed. If they want to change the dates, they can make a smaller window. Some of the cities here in the metro, I've heard, have brought that timeline in, so it's just a few days rather than the month under state law. Also, the 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. is kind of a big window, so some cities have said that you know, it might only be from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. Haven't heard from a whole lot of counties, but the same rules apply. So if a county wants to limit or prohibit, that is certainly in their authority.
Thank you, Lucas. Also, another question, when do unions have to recertify?
It depends on their contract, I believe. think it's either in their contract, not their collective bargaining agreement with the county, but in their contract with the employee organization that represents them. Okay, we are just talking internally here. Excuse us for the delay. That is something that we haven't looked into at this point, but we will, and we can send out clarification on that.
Another firework question. If the city makes a fireworks rule, could the county overrule that?
No. So the cities, just like counties, have home rule. So a county can have a county-wide ordinance, but the city would then still have the authority within their own jurisdiction.
All right, and so we want to just highlight a couple of important dates that are going to be coming up here. The annual ISAC Scholarship Golf Fundraiser is on August 2nd, again at Togue Valley Golf Course in Pleasant Hill. And then also the ISAC Annual Conference will be held this year in August 23rd through the 25th at Veterans Memorial Community Choice Credit Union Convention Center here in Des Moines. And also, we just want a reminder, registration for the annual conference went live today. And so if there aren't any further questions, we just want to remind you that we just provided you a snapshot of the significant pieces of legislation that moved through the Iowa General Assembly this year. But there's a bill summary book that's online. If you guys would have any additional questions, you certainly could email Lucas and I at any time. I'll provide my email. It's jcashman, C-A-S-H-M-A-N, at Iowa, spelled out I-O-W-A, counties.org.
And Lucas Binken, L-B-E-E-N-K-E-N, at iowacounties.org.
All right, and certainly we want to thank you for joining us today. And also I want to reiterate what Lucas said earlier, and thanking you for all the hard work and assistance you provided us as we lobby on your behalf up on the Hill every day. So thank you, and have a great day.